United States of America at great cost to the Treasury that was already effectively bankrupt. Now France really is bankrupt. And every attempt by the one lone rational voice, Necker, to come to some sort of arrangement with a budget that made any sense has been defeated. And you've got an unhappy population out there that's living in what is arguably the richest country in the world at the time, France, with the highest standard of living, and they're miserable. And that's very important to the people that govern you in Norway and the people that govern all over Europe, because hostility to Russia is the hallmark of globalism. If you admit that Russia has no interest in invading Europe, if you admit that Russia presents no imminent threat to Europe at all, then suddenly what's the rationale for your position in government? You're the globalist that keeps telling everybody war is imminent. So it's a tremendous mess. Trump may not have created it, but now he owns the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. And I don't see any evidence for new thinking, a diverging path, a readiness for any sort of diplomatic agreement on anything with anybody. And that includes in the Middle East with Iran. And then in the midst of all of this, which makes even less sense, we see new nuclear weapons arriving in Great Britain. And these weapons are designed to be launched by F-15s or F-35s. We call them tactical nuclear weapons, ideally suited to attack targets beyond the Baltic littoral in northern Russia, or potentially via Ukraine. And we announced this, and we're talking about these things. It looks like there is a universal agreement in Washington right now that the way to do business with Russia is to continue to bully and threaten. Now, you would think this, how many years are we into this war now? This has been going on since February of 2022. How has all the bullying and threatening worked out? It hasn't. It's been a catastrophe. It's made everything worse. So why are we continuing to do this? The next question is, who is really governing the United States? That's what people don't seem to know. You're talking about 1%, the 1% with billions that control trillions. And this 1% is driving us to war in the Middle East. It's driving us to war with Russia. And this 1% consists in some cases of ideologues. These ideologues go back to the 60s. Susan Sontag was a good example, who said the white race in America is a cancer that needs to be cut out. Then you have George Soros that says the world will be better, especially Europe, when it's flooded with Africans and Arabs. And the same thing is true in the United States. You know, the last administration was determined to flood us with millions of people from Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, the Middle East, India, and it continues. And Trump seems to have just brushed right by that. He's even privately talked about some form of limited amnesty for some of the illegals. Listen, all of these things are the antithesis of what people went and voted for him to do. He was elected on essentially a peace platform. Disengage from Ukraine, stop the war, insist on stability in the Middle East. People really believed that he would do that and put an end, hopefully, to the mass slaughter in Gaza and on the West Bank. All of that's gone. He has now not only taken the Biden policies, he's extended them and doubled down on them and made them worse. And none of this is helping us. In other words, we're not repatriating the manufacturing base to the United States as we do these things. These tariffs aren't going to produce that. These tariffs, which are normally designed in economic terms for defense, you're trying to defend an industry, a fledgling industry that you want to grow and thrive and so forth. That's what we did in the late 19th century, and that made a lot of sense. These things are designed to attack and bully. Apparently, as far as the Europeans are concerned, they hoisted the white flag fairly early. And the only way that I can come to terms with understanding that is, okay, we'll play ball with you, but you've got to continue this war in Ukraine for us. I think he signed on for that. But China, our efforts with China have been an abysmal failure. And the thing is, we haven't seemed to learn that the sanctions haven't worked. I don't know what else to say. I don't see the tariffs as a marvelous source of income for the United States. Whatever windfall profits the gas and oil industry is going to acquire as a result of this deal with Europe, they're minor. These things aren't game changers. They're not going to affect our $37 trillion national sovereign debt. They're not going to deal with the shortfall of over $2 trillion in our budgets. And it's back to what you said about Europe. It doesn't affect them in any positive way, as far as I can tell. So I'm waiting for something to happen that's going to blow up in our faces. And I guess it's a question of where does it happen first? Does it happen within our societies for reasons that are largely economic, but also human? Or does it happen in Ukraine? Or does it happen in the Middle East? I don't know. But something is going to give. My point is, you can't get that in a settlement with the United States that ends up with a U.S./British puppet in charge in Kiev. Even if it's a rump Ukrainian state, can't be done. Secondly, you can't have a state where the CIA, MI6, and Mossad are effectively controlling everything, which is the case today in Ukraine. That means that President Trump faces the unenviable task of crossing the Dnieper River, of going into Kiev, eventually down into Odessa. And I think that's what they're preparing to do. But before they go, they are going to systematically annihilate whatever remains of Ukrainian military power east of the Dnieper River. And that's what's going on. These cauldrons contain the last remnants. In other words, instead of a lightning offensive, this operation is more like a vacuum cleaner. In other words, you're using the vacuum cleaner at various points to clean up and eliminate the opposition. And remember, the purpose of this special military operation was also always root out and destroy the Ukrainian military that is there because of its association with the regime. That's almost over. That's going to happen very soon. And then they have to do what I said, because if you don't do it, whatever agreement you come to, you will see a resumption of cancer. While the tumor may go, within months, within years, the cancer will return because you haven't done a thorough surgery. The only way to do that is to cross that river. You still have underlying assumptions on the Western side that are false. Assumption number one, Russia's weak. And the longer this war lasts, the weaker it gets. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Russia is stronger now than it's ever been. Its military power is greater than it's been certainly since the early 1980s. So Russia is not at all suffering in the sense that we would like to believe they are. And Putin, again, is not this feckless dictator living in a state of paranoia. But these are the things that you hear in the mainstream media. That's why if we just keep this up a little longer, if we just continue to push, Russia will collapse. Russia will fall apart. No, it won't. On the other hand, we stand an excellent chance of falling apart for a whole range of reasons that I've been discussing here. So the question is, what comes first? I just don't know. But the bad news is, in the West, people continue to believe the nonsense. Now, somebody said, we'll fire 100 Tomahawks, and that'll be a game changer for the Ukrainians. There's almost no army left. The few people that are left are, as you pointed out, being rounded up and destroyed in these cauldrons. I don't see anything good happening inside Ukraine with regard to men on the ground with weapons of any kind. And firing Storm Shadows or firing Taurus missiles or, God forbid, Tomahawks, that's all designed to provoke the Russians. And that's because people think if we provoke them and then they respond to us, we'll be able to really hurt them. Somebody showed me the statistics on the integrated air defenses. I don't think I should say integrated, just air defenses, that we and the Israelis have provided in the region to protect Israel primarily, obviously. Their effectiveness has been roughly 35%. You can't survive missile attacks when only 35% of the missiles that you attack are destroyed. And that's why Iran now is in infinitely better shape than it was just a few months ago. It now has integrated air defenses, and they're getting better with each passing day. And we know the Russians in Ukraine, certainly over the last 4 years, their performance has reached the point where 97% of everything the Ukrainians and NATO throw at the Russians stop, disrupt, or destroy. That's superb. We have no such capability. So when you start talking about provoking the Russians, what's your plan when the Russians strike back? You mentioned Oreshniks. That's the tip of the iceberg. It's almost as though you're stepping into the ring with a heavyweight champion. And the heavyweight champion is new. He's young, he's vigorous and powerful. And you think of yourself as a heavyweight champion, but Your championship is 30 years old. You're not young and vigorous, and you're not bulging with muscles, but you think you are. How do you think this is going to turn out? It's like going in and fighting Mike Tyson, and it's amateur hour on the Western side. We don't know what we're doing. Rationality would dictate a whole different approach, and this is why people voted for Trump. Because Trump recognized, first of all, we can't spend out of control. We have to deal with spending, and he said those things. Now, nobody wants to cut anything. We know that. But inevitably, you've got to do it. One of those things we've got to cut is our investments in defense, which have been, in many respects, bad investments. Investments in the wrong force. It's been the wrong force now for at least 35 years. And in addition to the wrong force, bad policies have produced less effective troops, less effective formations. We need to go after the healthcare system. For a fraction of what we invest, people in Europe receive remarkably good health care. I'm not saying it's perfect, but there's still private insurance and lots of people invest in it, I know, in Germany and Austria, but you still have a pretty good basic health care system. And here, it's expensive to the point of absurdity. So we've got to deal with that. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We cannot spend indefinitely. And then you have, depending upon whom you want to talk to, at least 50 million illegals, and they're enjoying free health care. What is this problem? Who thought this up? Everyone shows up who's done nothing, paid nothing, and suddenly they get everything for nothing. What about the average American worker that's paid into these systems for years? People are beginning to figure out they've been taken to the cleaners. If you're an American, you get third place in whatever's up for discussion. And oh, by the way, whatever happened to militarizing the border to really get control of the drugs and human trafficking, because that continues. Oh, the optics are better. You don't have tens of thousands of going across. But unfortunately for us, through most of the legal ports of entry, got enormous corruption there. And the drug cartels have billions of dollars in cash to pay people off. And so the drug and human trafficking continues headed north. And then you have truckloads of cash headed south. This is incredible what goes on. So we haven't fixed these things. But optics are everything right now for politicians. It's what looks good must be good. The average American is gullible, but he's not that gullible anymore, and he's beginning to ask harder questions. So if you look at the fragility of our economy, and the underlying fundamentals are not good, and something does go wrong on a scale of 2008, which everybody's predicting, Jamie Dimon has come out and said he's looking for a major crisis in the very near future that could be infinitely worse than the 1929 Depression. Those are pretty grim words coming from Jamie Dimon. He's not exactly somebody who screams fire in the theater. If he's saying those things, everybody should be very worried. And he's not the only one by any means. My point is we're headed down a very dangerous road, but it's like everything else. For many people, until it happens, nobody believes. And on the military side, to listen to someone like this General Donahue make these incautious remarks about attacking the Russian enclave in Kaliningrad is lunacy. But he's aligned with Trump. Everyone's in the business of threatening and bullying. I don't see him having any success. And by the way, his influence over the conduct of Ukrainian operations was nothing if not disastrous, because we've gone back and looked at that. It looks as though the worse you do, the further you get. MI6 would like Zelensky to step in and replace Zelensky. I'm sure we would be receptive to that. But that's another puppet. That's not someone who is an independent. That is not someone who is going to govern exclusively in the national interests of the people that live in whatever the rump state of Ukraine becomes in the future. I don't see any evidence that an attempt to replace Zelensky with Zelensky will somehow or another be seen in Russia as meaningful. Again, it's what we said earlier. The cancer is there. The cancer has to be systematically purged and removed from the body politic in Ukraine. So replacing Zelensky with someone like Zelensky means nothing. But yes, I think people in Washington decide it's probably advantageous to have someone other than Zelensky there. Who knows? Again, we are not going to give up this game of interference, disruption, subversion that we play with our intelligence services. We're operating all over the world. We've got these entities. These fronts called National Endowment for Democracy and the USAID. Everyone cheered when President Trump set out to shut those down. They're terrible. They're occupied and staffed with people that want perpetual revolution. They're Trotskyite revolutionaries. They have nothing to do with liberal democracy. That's ridiculous. And the CIA certainly doesn't give a damn about that. These entities are about permanent conflict that is designed to enhance and strengthen the West. The problem is it doesn't work, and it hasn't done that. Things are not improving around the world for us.